Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode 9 of the We're Young But Just Us podcast, part of the Sports Opinions Podcast Network of podcasts. Today I have on Jeff Greer. He is a European sports writer, freelance, kind of not. His articles get published by The Athletic, where he was at the past year covering the University of Louisville athletics, and he's also been published in the Washington Post. Before that, before being a beat writer for The Athletic, he was the beat writer at the Courier-Journal for U of L Athletics, and of course at the Providence Review-Journal back in his home, New England and Rhode Island. On this episode, we talk about the coronavirus and his oral history of it over in Europe before he had to come home, the obvious impact it has on sports, the canceled NCAA tournament and the future of it, current sports, and how and when they will come back, and just how sports will be changed in terms of managing crisis. This is obviously not hopefully to the scale of the coronavirus, but maybe it has impacted because of it. And of course, we talk about the New England Patriots and Tom Brady leaving and the impact of maybe the Boston era of excellence ending. So sit back, stay inside, stay safe, wash your hands, and enjoy the show.
Swing drive, right center field. The Braves have won it. Elliott starts right, cuts it upfield, touchdown Dallas. They score and Reed, it's over. Corbett for the win. Bam. Got it. And the Scarlet Knights win it. There is pandemonium in Piscataway.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is episode 9 of the We're Young But Just Us podcast on the Sports Opinions Podcast Network of podcasts. Today, I'm excited to have on Jeff Greer. He is a European sports writer. He's been over in he's not European. He's from America, but he was over in Europe covering European sports after having a year at the Athletic covering University of Louisville sports, and that was after him being at the Courier-Journal as a beat writer for the University of Louisville. As a part of his European sports reporting, he has had articles published by The Athletic and the Washington Post, so he is definitely big time. I'll say that much. So how you doing, Jeff?
Well, you're the first person who's ever called me big time, so I appreciate that.
Not even Rick Pitino never called you big time at the press conferences?
I don't think so. I think he called me other things, but he never called me big time.
All right. So being as though you were covering European sports, you could jump right into it. And obviously, I want to get into basically the day, or I would say it's a week because it wasn't a single day, the week that sports died in reaction to coronavirus. Before we get into all the details and all that, I want to get your firsthand oral history of basically shit hitting the fan over in Europe. What has been your experience in the timeline of all this for you?
Okay, so when the first news of this virus started to trickle out, it would have been November and December in China, and everyone was sort of following it because it was getting pretty bad there. In December, my wife and I were in Belgium. We were doing okay there. We were already, just from both of our, we have a lot of experience traveling over the years, both for work and for pleasure. So we're always walking around with hand sanitizer and washing our hands a lot and trying not to touch our faces anyway. So we were already kind of doing that. And I do think that once word had gotten out that people carrying the virus had gone elsewhere in the world, and it was starting to really become something that everyone was paying attention to, December, January, we really started to be even more in tune with that, and just really be sure that we were being smart about trying to maintain space from people, and if we heard people coughing or anything like that, we would get away from it. So we were in Croatia for pretty much the entire month of January, and that was really when the first inkling that that things might be impacted by this started to pop up. Just out of the abundance of caution, it was becoming clear that there were concerns in that part of Europe. There were obviously we started to hear more and more about the stuff going on in Italy, and there was great concern about that. But also because the Croatia and Serbia, the former Yugoslavian countries, with the exception of Slovenia, are not in the Schengen area, which is sort of a protected all as one border patrol type situation in the European Union. So they all have different security protocols and visa protocols than the European Union, which means that a lot of Asian and particularly Chinese tourists get better visa situations to go travel to those places. So the countries we were in seemed to be a little bit more alert to the potential for people coming from that from the Wuhan area and elsewhere who had traveled there, coming back potentially with the virus. It seemed to be a little bit higher alert in I would say late January into early February. And then it really sped up in February, and we were in Belgrade, Serbia. And it started to become clear that sports were going to be affected. For me personally, I had already secured a contract to cover the European Championships this summer based in Munich. There's, I think, 13 different host cities, but I was going to be based in Munich. That really, once it became a topic of conversation that might be in danger, that's when it really hit me that this thing was speeding up quicker than we anticipated. The funny thing is, as I told you before we came on, we flew home on Tuesday, which would have been, let me think about this, it would have been March 10th. We had already planned to fly home, Kyle. Like my friend was getting married I think he's still getting married in Savannah. And we had planned to fly back for that and be in the States for about 3 weeks, check in on my dog, change our clothes out. And in the build up to that, while we were in Belgrade, I kept getting all of these notifications that the EuroLeague was contemplating suspending play, that they're having trouble trying to reschedule EuroLeague games involving teams, the team in Milan. It really was starting to hit me that this was going to be a long-term thing. And then we got on the plane, and we experienced no whatsoever challenges for getting back into the United States. No, they asked where we went, but we didn't get any tests or have to go into self-quarantine or anything like that. We just kind of breezed through. And literally, like, as we were sitting down on Tuesday night, stuff really sped up even more so with American sports. And in the blink of an eye, the NCAA tournament was canceled, and all of everything just all came down at once. So unfortunately for me, that takes away a lot of the work that I was going to be doing in Greece and Germany and some other places over the next few months. But it also takes away the work that I would be doing if I was here. So it just has been just a really crazy whirlwind the last couple of weeks. And ironically, the response pretty much everywhere has been pretty much the same, with washing your hands, keep your distance, all that stuff. And culturally, it's just not – it's very similar to what we're experiencing now in the United States when we were in Serbia and Croatia and those places.
So on that, I believe it was that Tuesday night before everything really hit the fan, the Ivy League did cancel their tournament, and I think they definitely were the first domino to drop. So I'm guessing, since when you're talking about your experience over in Europe and hearing everything about the Euro Leagues and the summer games possibly getting canceled, when people were like calling them out for going straight to at the time before we knew all about everything getting canceled, that going straight to canceling without the empty arena, I'm guessing you, instead of the other reporters, and myself included, who were kind of upset at the fact that they went that early, to cancel it, you saw it as, yeah, this is the right move just because of what you've been seeing in Europe, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the situation in Italy, and obviously I'm not an epidemiologist or an infectious diseases expert, but I have a couple, I wouldn't say friends, but contacts in Italy who are involved in basketball who were very concerned weeks before weeks before anything came up, like the Ivy League or the NCAA tournament and all the conference tournaments, all that stuff. And they were just saying, this is really bad and it's going to get worse. And those are just lay people in Italy who are paying attention to this. So from that vantage point, yeah, I was starting to think like, there is no way that a country with 320 million or however many people in the United States there are now, there's no way that we are going to be immune to a similar situation. So when the Ivy League canceled, that to me said, okay, there are people in leadership positions in the United States, at least in some areas, who are getting enough information that this is very concerning to them, to the point where they would go straight to, like you said, the cancellation out of abundance of caution. And I think it's the right move, and I think Italy really stands more so than anywhere else as the kind of as a look at what the United States could, and I hope that this isn't the case, but the United States could experience, because Italy is not that different than the United States. Whereas it's a lot easier maybe to think, China and South Korea are on the other side of the world, different cultures, Iran, different culture. But when you start to get to Western Europe and countries that I now know very well are very similar to the United States, that's really when it started to concern me.
Totally out of context. One was, did you get to go to Italy at all when you were over there?
We've been there previously. We were planning to go back. We'd been there, I think, about a week or 2 weeks in 2018, and we were planning to be back there this summer. So we had not. Luckily for us, because that would have challenged us getting back into the United States through border control.
Oh yeah, that would have been bad.
We had not been there yet. We were Spain. We did Spain, France, Belgium. We were in London for a few days, and then Croatia, Serbia, and Romania were the main places we were.
So you were talking about, I guess, Croatia and they're dealing with the border in comparison to the EU. Did you have any direct experience with maybe these, like, any more information, like, with countries going on lockdown a little bit earlier than the U.S.? Because I know you said you hadn't been to Italy, but did you have any direct experience with, having to social distance earlier than we had to?
Honestly, not really, because I think when it became the first place where we were, where it was actually like where it just felt more common that people knew about it, was in a city called Timisoara in Romania. We were there the first week of March. Romanians, there's a lot of Romanians in Italy, and they have a very close relationship with Italy. And there's a lot of travel between the two countries. And someone who had traveled to Italy came back. I believe, I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, but I'm pretty sure they were some kind of school official or something. And when they came back, they tested positive, and then 3 other people who lived with him, his wife and I think 2 kids, tested positive, and then other people in his apartment complex tested positive, and then students at the school tested. So when that all happened, the city really did start to feel like they weren't closing restaurants or anything like that. But you could definitely get the sense that, people were wearing more masks. It was definitely obvious that people were hand sanitizing a lot more and wiping things off a lot more. But nothing at the borders. All that stuff really kicked in kind of as we were coming back. The Italian stuff didn't affect us because we didn't have to go there. We weren't going there. But they were really the first ones to start locking down areas and keeping people inside. And we were, I think, in Romania when that decision happened, and we didn't have to worry about it because we flew through Germany. So on the way back to the States. So we did not experience that at all. No.
So, yeah, on that point, actually not on that point, sorry, don't know why I said that. From going on from there, so we talked about the cancellations and all of that. Everything is basically canceled at this point. And I believe the dominoes started to fall with Serie A, the premier Italian football league. And then, of course, the domino effect to all the United States Premier League. Everything's basically canceled all the way down to NASCAR. So I didn't want to get into this later, but I just thought I'd have to since we started talking about the way the government's reacting. It was interesting to see the confusion in the NCAA environment. I think that the NBA came out and canceled it once they found that Rudy Gobert was positive, and they said we can't do this anymore. And then NHL talked about it, and like more leagues talked about it. That was just talking. The really confusing aspect was the NCAA and their weird reactionary results to all this, where it seemed that it was the conferences were waiting for somebody to cancel first, and then everybody else canceled, and then the NCAA seemed pretty slow with everything. And what has been your biggest reaction to the way the conferences and the NCAA canceled it? Because it felt just very messy. I know the key term is fluid situation, but it felt very messy. What is your opinion on the way the NCAA and the conferences went down with their cancellations?
Yeah, I think it was. It kind of reminded me of that scene in The Office when Ed Helms, Rainn Wilson, not Jim Krasinski,
John Krasinski,
and Steve Carell are doing their like finger gun like standoff. It kind of felt like somebody was waiting for somebody else to make a decision.
Yeah.
It was weird to see the NCAA operating kind of like on the same level as the conferences instead of being the one to lead on it. So, I go back and forth on this because on the one hand, I'm always up for bashing the NCAA. I think that
everyone is there. Nobody will defend them at this point.
Yeah, it's easy to use them as a punching bag, but at the same time, and I apologize, my dog is upstairs barking. At the same time, I think everyone was sort of paralyzed in the moment. And I shouldn't say paralyzed, but sort of very concerned, but also like, nobody wants to overreact. Everything's moving so fast on Tuesday and Wednesday, really Wednesday, obviously, moving so fast. And I kind of get it, like it's easy to say like, the NCAA should have stood up and said, we're canceling all of this. And it's easy to say it that they should have, in so many other cases, also exercised a lot more sensitive, empathetic leadership that reflects a deeper understanding of their role in society. At the same time, I do think that they recognize the level or the magnitude of canceling things. And I think, and we're seeing that where they've got these special committees now trying to figure out, should seniors get another season? They already made that decision for spring sports. It's just recognizing how significant all of this is, for me, makes it a little bit easier for me to cut them some slack. But yes, I do think that in a perfect world, we would have all benefited from the powers that be at the NCAA kind of planting a flag in the ground and saying, we are doing X, Y, and Z, and we expect all of our conferences to follow suit, instead of kind of waiting to see if the Big Ten or the ACC or the SEC or someone makes a move and then go from there.
Actually, I'm gonna get into like the future of like sports in terms of like the administration side and planning. But I have to say, since you are even though you were in Europe, you are very ingrained in the like in terms of contacts and everything. Like college basketball was your thing before you went to Europe. Do you have any like unique experiences with those 2 days, just having all those contacts and everything, or were you just like the rest of us as fans watching everything unfold?
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of crazy because I'm trying to get my days right. The tournament, the NCAA tournament, was canceled on Thursday. Is that right?
It was what's today? So today's a Tuesday. Yeah, I think it was a Thursday because since I'm a marketing intern, we were at a U of L baseball game that Wednesday on 3/11 day. It was they were playing. It was elementary school day, so it was the last U of L baseball game was just a bunch of kids all together, and like this. Thinking back to it now, it's like wow, that's a lot of potential for disease transfer. So that was last week, and on that Wednesday, I remember we were all reacting upstairs in the press area about regarding I think the NCAA closed it off. That was what the Wednesday was, that they closed everything off to the public, that there would be a tournament, but nobody would go, and that was also the day after, maybe I think the Ivy League canceled. Yes, it was the day after. Wednesday was we're closing everything off day, and then the night came, and that was when the NBA happened. If I'm correct.
Yeah, that was bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my first day back. I can say I remember Wednesday night then, whatever the night was before they canceled everything. So I do think it was Thursday. Yeah, Wednesday night I was getting texts that were saying the tournament's going to be canceled, and that was, I mean, it was surreal. I have watched every single NCAA tournament almost in its entirety, with the exception of 2 times. One time I missed the Final Four because my family was in England, and it was like 1998, so they didn't, that kind of college basketball in the United States was not on any television channels in London at the time. And the other time was, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was caught up with this girl when I was in college, and I was like not paying as much attention to the tournament.
Oh no, that is just tragic. Oh no. Oh.
And I'm not saying that like we were in a bedroom or anything. We were like in coffee shops, and I was like too cool to watch the NCAA tournament, and I'm still so embarrassed that is the case. But anyway, it's just surreal, man. It's like everyone was just feeling so dejected. Like it was just kind of like, yeah, this is going to be canceled, and people were, people who have stakes in the tournament were disappointed. But I think more than anything else, they were just kind of shell shocked. Like everything just sped up so quickly that they just, I mean, the fact that teams were already arriving at their conference tournaments just adds to it, where you're staying in a hotel expecting to play. You arrive Wednesday night, you're expecting to play Thursday, and your games are canceled, and then next thing you know, the entire thing is canceled. It has to feel like the rug is getting pulled out from under you. So it was for lack of a better word or phrase to come up with, I would just say it was surreal, and I would be surprised if we experienced anything like that again in our lifetime. God forbid.
So from the sources you were hearing that day, it jumped straight to they're canceling it. Like there was no talk. It was just rumors that they might have pushed it back. Everybody's throwing May Madness around. Everything you were hearing is like, no, there's no way it was going to cancel. No postponement.
It was kind of like there was the hope, the optimistic side of things was they should try to postpone this and push it back and see if maybe we can do it at a later date. But then there was sort of the like, I don't want to say like gallows level realism, but it was just like, I think a lot of people, they were sort of resigned to like, we hope this happens, but we think this is going to happen. And I think once that entered their minds, I think for a lot of people it was hard to shake the feeling that it was headed in that direction.
So it's just going to be an interesting point the way, because it goes back to like the future of sports in terms of like, I know I tweeted out like a couple of nights ago when I was just chilling at work, was that this is going to be something that people write about for a while in terms of thesis papers and everything. And there's going to be committees for a long time that are created just because of this in sports. So what do you feel like is the biggest change? Like, because we know the biggest change coming around next time in terms of like a rainy day committee and all these things happening, like, is there going to be like more planning and more committees set up to say, hey, we can plan around this and like have an effective plan because of our experience with this? Is that just the direction we're going to go, that maybe with enough planning we could be prepared? I know this is very small potatoes in terms of the big world scheme of obviously a pandemic, or in the terms of like sports administration and all that. Do you see more committees, long-term committees being created for like force majeure, I think is the legal term, for event like world acts of God? Is that something coming?
Look, I think as you and I both know from following, just from following the news and and existing for the last however many years, that storms seem to be getting stronger. It seems like things are getting worse there. There's more and more flooding and things like that. I think we are in a generation now of people under the age of really 40, I think, maybe even under the age of 60, who are going to experience a lot of things, maybe not to this magnitude, to this level, but we're going to experience a lot more things that can shake this country to its core, I think. Not to sound like an alarmist, but I would hope that because of that, and because of the understanding that that's probably the case, that there would be contingency plans. I think the problem with a situation like a coronavirus or H1N1, or I don't know if you've seen Contagion, but something like that, virus, like, the problem with that is you can do so much before the bottom line is you just have to keep people apart from each other. And for pretty much anything other than like golf, where maybe the golfer carries their own bag and they keep distance from each other, like there's very, I mean, I guess you could play tennis, but you're going to be touching the same ball. So, you constantly come back to this thought of like, okay, well, yeah, basketball and probably soccer, football, you probably can't play those sports, hockey, everyone's too close together. It's really physical. But then you start thinking about what your hands are doing when you're playing those sports. So even with tennis, for instance, if you're an unknowing Trojan horse of coronavirus carrying the virus without having any symptoms, and you're playing tennis and you sweat or you sneeze or something onto your hand, and then you touch that ball and the virus gets on that ball, and then the other person is playing with you touches the ball, they can get it if they touch their face. And so, I realize I'm off on a tangent here, but like the challenges, even with a contingency plan and with all the, with a plan for the future, for future instances like this, is that it may still be too difficult to prevent something like a virus that can kind of sneak into an area without you knowing it, from interfering with sports. So I am obviously not paid enough or in a position of power enough or smart enough to be making those kinds of decisions. But hopefully the people who are in those roles maybe have a better idea of how to proceed in future situations than we do.
Well, what about this one, more or less than of this? Do you think the NCAA will ever, because of this incident, create contingency plans and create a window of a force majeure where they can eventually get a major championship to be played in the future because of their experience with this? Or is that just something we can't, that's just because of the NCAA rules and their schedule that just cannot happen?
Well, I do think that you could probably do it with, I realize that the NFL draft schedule makes this part hard, but you probably do it with fall sports and football. where you say, okay, we can't play in January, but just this is random, but like we can play in March, like something like that. It's hard for me to imagine that scenario with anything later than that, just because of when school ends. Like even with March Madness, like you could probably get away with postponing it until like May. And I know with baseball and softball, they push pretty deep into the summer past when their terms are over, but it's still only like a couple weeks after school ends for a lot of those schools. Because a lot of schools go into May. I got out of college each year. Our semester at Pitt ended at the end of April. So like for students like that, you're playing into May for baseball, but if you make a deep run in your conference tournament, you go to the College World Series, you're still not that far out of school. So I guess what I'm thinking is like, if you're the NCAA and you want to say, okay, we have a plan now where this can't go off in March, if it's talking about March Madness, that can't go off in March, but we can have it in May. That's a big difference than saying we can have it in like July, because yeah, those guys are still enrolled in school, but I feel like universities have a little bit more at stake with all of these sports because they're tangentially, at least they're supposed to be based on the fact that these are students at their university. But yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting thought of just like thinking through the process of saying, could you potentially have it at a later date? I don't know what all of the parameters would be in terms of the university and the academic side of it, accepting all of that, and having the staffing and all the different things that go into those events to be able to pull that off. But, it's an interesting idea.
NCAA, you can steal this one from me. I say you create a window of you can't get it if you can't get started after May 1st, you can cancel. And then for NCAA tournament for Harbor Seas, you go the women's route. Major in the case of force majeure act of God, where you had to hold back, you create the window. You have higher seeds host in the early first, maybe the first 2 weekends because of crazy, and keep the Final Four safe. A lot of easier said than done, but you can steal my idea if you want.
Love it. That's a good idea.
All right, so that's a good transition to now we're talking something. Sadly, we're still NCAA tournament, but now we have to throw, for the first time ever, the NCAA tournament into the realm of the 1994 World Series. Of it's not happening, and it's going to be talked about forever. And it's gonna go the way of 1994, and like the what ifs and then everything. So first off, before we get into the seniors and all the scholarship stuff that you already brought up, who are like, I know it's a very vague term because when you compare the NCAA tournament to a playoffs like 94, it's those are the best teams of the best, and like there may be like your one or two like your 94 Expos, but you also, when you talk about NCAA tournament, you talk about your best teams and also the teams that snuck in, your Rutgers for the first time in 29 years, and your other mid-majors who are finally going to tournament. So like who are the 94 Expos out of all this in your mind? I know you got to throw like maybe Dayton up there like number one, you think?
Yeah, so because the Expos were, I mean, I know they were good at the time, and they had some history to them. Like they're still kind of random to me. And I mean, I know Dayton has a rich basketball history, but not to that level. So yeah, I think that's a good one. I would say Dayton is probably my Montreal Expos, just because Kansas, Duke, the schools that Michigan State, the schools that people were talking about as having a real shot, Gonzaga, they've been there so many times, and they've been at that level so many times that it's not hard to imagine them reproducing a season like that in the near future. And that's not to diminish Dayton's hopes of something similar down the line, but it's a lot harder. I mean, you've got to capture lightning in a bottle with 2, 3, 4 special players that you can build around and build up to the year where you make this kind of run. And I think for a long time we're going to be – anyone who follows Dayton or follows college basketball, I think we're going to be talking about what could have been for that team and for Obi Toppin for a really long time.
I think other teams, like, you got to throw, I think San Diego State. I haven't been following too much basketball recently, but I know this has been a crazy year for them. I think they're going to fall under that boat. And then when you go past the elite teams and talk about your teams that have finally made the tournament, or we're going to finally make the tournament, I think you got to throw in, because why NCAA, you can't really compare it to the 94 season is you have your teams like Rutgers who are going to finally break their streak. Like, I don't think outside of Dayton, I don't think there's any bigger losers than Rutgers this year for that.
Yeah, it's crushing. And I know as a Jersey guy, like you especially appreciate that. And, Rutgers getting there would have been awesome. Kind of similar to the Northwestern thing a few years ago. I realized that Rutgers had been there before and Northwestern was a very different team, but the long drought and some really, really, really bad basketball to get to that point. Just big time sucks for Rutgers. I do think also for Seton Hall,
gonna bring them up too. Yep.
Yeah, like in state also, you're talking about a Final Four contender with the type of player in Miles Powell who could be the Kemba Walker or the Shabazz Napier or all those famous guards, Dwayne Wade, who have carried their teams deep into the tournament. Jersey could have had a really fun March. And both of those schools, I think, it really hits hard. But, yeah, that's what I was thinking about when they canceled everything. Admittedly, I was thinking about Dayton and San Diego State and Gonzaga and Kansas and teams that had a real shot at winning it all. But I was really thinking about the teams that were just so desperate to get into the tournament just to be there. And who knows what happens after that, especially Rutgers. That part really kind of stuck with me on Thursday when everything came down.
You also got to think, I think he's building something there too. I think Penn State Lamar Stevens was their guy. Like, what was the future for Penn State too? And they had a great season this year that maybe wasn't rewarded. Illinois too.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I was going to say I generally try not to acknowledge Penn State.
I forgot about the pit. I don't like to either,
But seriously, before the season started, people were talking about Pat Chambers being on the hot seat and having to produce a solid season. And they had a great season. And Illinois is another great example of a team that has been sort of struggling and sort of had a few middling years where they thought maybe that would be the year where they start to round the corner. And this year really felt like the first step in that, or the more significant step in that direction. So you really do feel for those teams. And, even Louisville with the collection of players they had this year, the high hopes that they had, missing out on this tournament, a bunch of their key guys are now graduating, and they seem to be only months away from the NCAA, a future NCAA punishment. Even a school like that, it kind of felt like, this was a chance to get in that window of having maybe a run or who knows what could happen in March before kind of getting back to dealing with the reality of past mistakes and past situations. So there's so many different schools that this just feels like, just so painful and so unfair for them to have to experience this awful
really is like the looking at the stats at the end of 94 was like Tony Gwynn would have been a 400 hitter. If he gone 462 games, like the pitching numbers. And like the way I compare it is you look at all these different stories if you just look at the bracket, I'm looking at Lenardi's potential brackets, like could Leonard Hamilton got his title? Like another thing. It's like he gets even. There's so much.
Yeah, there's so many different things to think about and possibilities that we'll just never know the answer to. And honestly, being someone who has shifted away from playing in organized competitive sports for 15 years now. I mean, I still play rec league stuff, but not playing in things that matter. You really start to get more perspective the older you get on what could have been. And you start to think more about, I wish this had happened and this had happened, but you just know that there's nothing you can ever do to change the outcome. And for all of us who love sports, we are now being faced with the prospect of thinking like, what would have – like you keep touching on the 94 – or we keep talking about the 94 baseball season. It's a perfect example of like, partially completed season or almost entirely completed season. And here we are knowing who the good teams were, and we're just never going to know more than that. And it's just a bizarre thing that it's going to take a really long time to come to terms with.
And the worst part about it is watching North Carolina be a good team next year, and we can't. And like the one season we got to rag on them, it doesn't matter. Watch that happen.
Yeah, I think they're going to be very good next year.
So we got. Let's above all of that. We got robbed of that. Them sitting at home. All right, so a little bit rapid fire before we move on and close out the podcast. All right, one of the big four, or not big four, because NFL's obviously September. One of the three sports coming back, and are two of them coming back? Because obviously NHL, NBA. What's your opinion?
My opinion is that Major League Baseball will have a kind of like similar to the NBA lockout season in the late 90s. I bet the Major League Baseball ends up playing a portion of the season. I think, and I do wonder how many of their initial games will be played maybe without crowds.
That point. No, I didn't really think about that either. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'd be intrigued by that one. But I do think we'll have a World Series and we'll have the playoffs and all of that stuff. I do think that will happen. But that's so far out that it's a lot more comfortable for me to make that prediction. I do wonder, because their seasons had gotten so far along, I do think that it's not that difficult to sell. Hey, we're going to do, essentially like the old baseball scenario where there's just the pennant, the championship series and then the World Series, where there's like four teams in the playoffs. I think you could do that. I do think it would be hard for, in the NBA, obviously there were like 4 or 5 teams in the Western Conference who would be real contenders, and I think it would be tough to cut out that team that would be the third team in your selection process or whatever you want to call it. But I do think that that's a real possibility that we see sort of a shortened, slimmed down version of the NBA playoffs. Now, something that I wish that they would think about is if they would say do like a single elimination thing and include more teams. But I realize I'm supposed to be rapid fire here. So I will say if I had to guess right now, Major League Baseball will have the World Series and its playoffs, and the NHL and the NBA will not have any playoffs.
Dim, but realistic, obviously. Yeah. And then obviously we go from there. The second rapid fire, which is gone under the radar a bit, but it's still there. Tokyo. What do you think?
I think, let's see, this August. Yeah, I think they'll probably have that. I think events in July are going to be the ones that are the last ones that get sort of canceled outright. I think it's a positive sign that the Derby got moved back, but not canceled.
Oh, they will burn down the city before they cancel the Derby.
I know, yeah. I was actually laughing because I'm like, oh, that gives me a shot to go. If we still go to Europe, maybe we can come back in time to go to the Derby. But yeah, I do think they'll have the Olympics.
And all right, on that note, I just thought of that. Do Italy and China show up? Like countries that are like really bad by that point, if it were to happen?
Yeah, I think those will be the countries that get sort of their like triumphant athletes who people cheer for because of everything they've gone through. And I would guess that the United States will have a little bit of that vibe to it. But I do really worry that because we're coming in behind Italy by a couple of weeks, we may be in rougher shape. The Germans, the French, the Spanish, the English, we're going to be, I think, a little bit in rougher shape than Italy and China and South Korea. So I would expect those countries to be there. It's just so weird to think about. I don't know what to expect as far as representation and who out of the final groups that would actually be able to compete would go. It's just hard right now for me to imagine anybody doing anything.
It really is. We're only a couple of days out, and everybody says we're months away from anything about human civilization returning to normal. So that's all the coronavirus talk I got. And then I know since we talked last year, you did say you're a New England guy. You grew up there. The era, or as you would say up there, your magic era is dead. As everyone else would say, ding dong, the witch is dead. Tom Brady is no longer a Patriot. Initial reactions, just because it's wow.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I went on to CNN.com just to check in on the headlines and everything today. And Tom Brady announcing that he's leaving the Patriots was in like size 8 font at like the bottom of the page. And in any other scenario where he announces that is like on every ESPN debate show, every Fox Sports debate show for weeks. It is like national news that an iconic figure leaves the team that he's been on the whole time. In the same way that it was a big deal when Peyton Manning left the Colts. It's just so weird to me. I can just say when he really, his breakout year when the Patriots went and won the Super Bowl, I was 15 years old and I was obsessed with the Patriots. And the guy just it's hard to put even into words what he did that year. And just rose to the occasion. I mean, obviously he had a great team around him and an amazing coaching staff. But, just to have the wherewithal and the presence and the command of your job to be able to move into that role and do it so seamlessly and then carry that role with all that pressure for the next 20 years. It's hard for me to imagine someone being like that ever again in football. I mean, with the advances in modern science and medicine, hopefully that's the case that more great athletes can do that. But it's just the amount of memories that the guy has provided for people from New England and then all the other hangers-on who have decided that they also like our sports teams. It's just been incredible. And it's like anything else with this coronavirus, all these things being canceled, it doesn't even feel real. I feel like I'm watching a movie right now and that someday I'm going to wake up and it's not going to be something that really happened. But it's just, it's crazy to me that he's not going to be in a Patriots uniform. And it's crazy to me that he'll even be playing for someone else. I'm sure
it's nuts to think about at the end of it. It's like, wow, him and Belichick were supposed to go out in the sunset together.
I know. It's like trying to imagine, probably for Bulls fans, Michael Jordan playing for the Wizards. I mean, it's just like, it's crazy to even think about. So I guess we're all in shock. My dad hasn't texted me yet, so I should probably do a wellness check on him. But it's just kind of a strange feeling right now.
Is outside of Belichick still coaching? Is that's like I mean, to think about it, really, the golden era technically carried over into last year, and even the Red Sox. People would say it's still going, but it's kind of like we're fading out of the Boston era a little bit. It does feel that way, but I have to say, in terms of players and those that really captivated the New England market, the Boston area, I think Tom Brady was the last to really go. I mean, Garnett went off years ago. Big Papi retired. I mean, you have the Bruins guys, but they none of them really captured. Like the guys that were part of the 11 run, but they haven't really captured to the magnitude of any of those other players. It's like Brady was like, who else is like the big guys left in Boston? It really is.
Yeah,
we're at the end of it.
Yeah, it's a changing of the guard. I mean, I think the Celtics have undergone so many changes in the last few years that, I think Paul Pierce was really the last.
I thought Garnett was Pierce. I thought for some reason Garnett was the guy that was there for the whole career. But it was Pierce. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, Garnett and Ray Allen, although things ended not as great with him, but those guys had a huge impact on the Celtics and their fan base. And Garnett definitely is a fan favorite. But yeah, like Pierce, Tom Brady, David Ortiz, Manny Ramirez moving on, Pedro Martinez retiring. Those are the guys.
Even Mookie Betts is gone.
Yeah, I mean,
that was only 2 years ago.
Yeah, Mookie just really, that one was sort of a gut punch. And my family, I mean, I've always been the biggest Patriots fan out of everyone in my family. My brother and my dad are really diehard Red Sox fans. And so that's their favorite. And we all like the Celtics. My sister really likes the Celtics. So it's been interesting that all of us have experienced sort of gut punches in varying forms. So yeah, I mean, we're kind of in this new phase where I'm kind of left wondering who's going to be the face of these franchises going forward. And even Belichick, man, like whenever he retires or moves on, like, yeah, he's a big deal, obviously, in New England. I mean, he's a huge, huge deal. I think Brady's a bigger deal. Brady has just been the face of the franchise. He's an international star. People know who he is everywhere. The glamour around his whole life. I mean, just the comebacks, all that stuff. I mean, yeah, Belichick's got the sort of the aura around him as a great coach and certainly all the controversy around him too. But like Brady to New Englanders there's just nobody like him. It's just the only guy I would even compare to him is Ortiz, I think, and Larry Bird from the 80s. I mean, it's hard to imagine the day when he's not in a Patriots jersey. And unfortunately for those of us who follow and support the Patriots, that's going to happen relatively soon.
It feels it is the end. It really is. And like in the 90s, it was New York. Then Boston stole the baton for 2 decades. I mean, to be fair, New York kind of had a stranglehold for sporadically over like 3 decades and whatever, and more of that because of the Yankees. But Boston stole the baton. And who's next? Who steals it from Boston? I mean, you gotta think. We don't know.
That's a tough question. I don't know.
Don't know. It's going to be the topic of now because, the Chiefs won. I mean, they only got 2 teams, though. I mean, we don't know which major city is going to prop up. Tell you who it's not. It's not L.A.
Yeah, maybe it'll be San Francisco if the Warriors ever get it back together. Maybe the 49ers will be a factor going forward. It just feels like – didn't it feel like to you that the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl – and honestly, I mean, the fact that the Patriots beat them is shocking to me last year because it feels kind of like Mahomes and the Chiefs are about to go on a really dominant run in the NFL. Maybe I'm crazy, but it feels
they really do feel that way. And Andy Reid would finally get his dynasty that he was robbed of 2 decades ago.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, like he's going up against losing to smaller market teams, but then running into, like, even if they did make the Super Bowl, a bigger dynasty. But yeah, maybe Andy Reid will finally get his dynasty. All right. Well, I'm happy to have you on, Jeff. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know we all have a lot of it now, but thank you for taking the time to come on, and I hope everybody in your family is being safe and all of that. So,
thank you very much, and to you as well. After talking to your dad and grandpa and your family, hopefully everybody's doing okay.
Everyone is doing well, and I am a senior. That's over now. That's it hit me. That's over.
It's crazy.
It abruptly ended last week. So
wow.
That goes out to everyone listening too. Wash your hands. Practice social distancing. Don't go out. It's really not worth it. You never know who you could pass it on to. You don't know if you have it and are not showing symptoms. Two things that I talked about on the episode that hasn't come out. I recorded one on Saturday was check on the elderly check on your elderly family members, and number two, to check on those with anxiety and mental issues, because you never know what they're going through during this whole craziness of the world. This has been episode 9 of the We're Young But Justice podcast. Of course, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, Spreaker, YouTube, and all your fun little apps, maybe even MySpace. I don't know how the automatic Spreaker app works. You can follow me at kduck_52. Oh, yeah, Jeff, your socials and your information about your work.
Everything is at Jeff Greer now, so that's nice. At Jeff Greer on Twitter, at Jeff Greer on Instagram, and I'm always posting stuff about my work on there, either on The Athletic. I've had some stuff with the Washington Post, Providence Journal Bulletin, my hometown paper from back in the day. So just stay tuned, and I appreciate the plug.
No problem. And I'm guessing since you're not full-time, you don't have any fun codes for us.
Maybe eventually. We'll see what.
I love that. If you know, following all these reporters through the first couple of years of The Athletic. And again, follow me at kduck_52 on Twitter, at sportsopinions30 on Twitter. That's the main where you'll find all the podcasts. You have this, We're On With Just Us, the main sports opinion show with Alex Cuesta Dose with Alex and his brother David, Personal Foul with Colton Kessler, and the Playbook with Rob Planner and Joe Hackett. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Stay safe, stay inside, and have a great one.